In a world where every word is scrutinized and every moment can be twisted, one question has the power to break a man's silence. Barron Trump, just a young boy, faces a relentless reporter probing into his family's private life. But when the reporter crosses the line, Barron's response isn't just a defense. It's a quiet storm that leaves everyone speechless. Prepare for a moment that will leave you questioning strength, resilience, and the untold power of silence. The room buzzes softly with whispered conversations. Journalists sit in neat rows, their pens poised, laptops open, ready to capture every word. The presidential press room feels unusually tense, the bright lights overhead illuminating the stoic faces of the Trump family seated at the front. Behind the podium, an ornate American flag stands tall, its fabric gently swaying under the ventilation. A boy, no older than 12, sits quietly at the back of the room with his mother. His oversized blazer hangs awkwardly on his small frame, making him look both curious and slightly out of place among the crowd of hardened reporters. The atmosphere tightens as Donald Trump steps up to the podium. Behind him stands Barron Trump, slightly taller than his peers, but with an air of quietness that separates him from the chaotic energy of the room. His hands are clasped in front of him, his expression neutral, but his eyes reveal a thoughtful awareness of everything around him. Barron stands out in the crowd, not because of his status, but because of his calm and collected demeanor. He is deliberate in his movements, keeping a measured distance from the microphones and cameras. Unlike the reporters, who radiate a sense of purpose bordering on aggression, Barron exudes patience. As the press fires questions at his father, Barron remains still, his posture firm yet unassuming. He scans the room, his gaze occasionally landing on the young boy sitting quietly at the back. A female reporter in the front row raises her hand and leans forward. Her smile is polite but tinged with something sharper, almost predatory. "Mr. Trump," she begins, her voice loud enough to command the room's attention. "Do you believe your family is the ideal representation of American values?" The question hangs in the air like a thundercloud. A flicker of tension crosses Donald's face, but he quickly masks it with a broad, confident smile. Behind him, Barron tilts his head slightly, watching his father's response. In the back, the boy's small hand hesitantly rises. No one notices him yet, but his quiet presence adds another layer of tension to the charged atmosphere. The room is a blend of whispers and flashes, the kind of space where everyone wears a mask of professionalism but hides sharp intentions beneath. The reporter, a woman in her mid-40s with a poised, confident demeanor, adjusts her glasses and tilts her head slightly. Her movements are deliberate, calculated to seem non-threatening, yet her words carry an edge. "Mr. President," she begins, her voice slicing through the faint murmurs, "you've often spoken about family values. But in a world so divided, how do you ensure your family stays united under such scrutiny?" Donald Trump responds with a practiced smile, his tone as polished as the golden tie he wears. "Family is everything," he says smoothly. "No matter what the world says, we know who we are. That's what matters." The reporter's smile tightens. Her eyes shift to Barron, who is standing just a step behind his father. The youngest Trump is tall for his age, his posture straight but not stiff, his expression unreadable. "And Barron?" she presses, her tone softening but her intent sharpening. "How do you feel about all this? Do you ever wish for a quieter life, away from the cameras?" The room falls silent, every pair of eyes turning toward the teenager. Barron doesn't flinch. His gaze meets the reporter's, steady and unyielding. "I think," he begins, his voice low but clear, "that life is what you make of it. Cameras or not, it's still my life." The response is measured, mature beyond his years, but the reporter isn't satisfied. She leans in slightly, her expression shifting to one of feigned curiosity. "That's a very composed answer, but surely, as a young man, you've felt the pressure. Isn't it hard to live up to expectations?" Barron's hands remain at his sides, but there's a subtle tension in his fingers, a faint clenching and unclenching that betrays his inner thoughts. His mother, Melania, watches from the corner of the room. Her presence is understated but powerful, her eyes fixed on her son. "Expectations are part of life," Barron replies after a pause. Everyone has them, whether they're in the public eye or not. It's how you handle them that matters. The reporter's lips curve into a slight smirk, as though she's found a crack to exploit. And how do you handle them? Do you ever feel the weight is too much? There's a moment of silence, and for the first time, a flicker of something. Frustration, perhaps, crosses Barron's face. But he doesn't let it linger. I focus on what I can control, he says firmly. His answer is simple, but it carries a weight that momentarily silences the room. The reporter, however, isn't done. She shifts her focus, her gaze landing on Melania. Mrs. Trump, she says, her tone almost gentle. As a mother, how do you guide Barron through all of this? Do you worry about the impact it might have on him? Melania hesitates, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. She exchanges a brief glance with Barron, who gives her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Taking a breath, she responds in her signature calm tone. I teach him to be strong, she says, to focus on his values and not be distracted by what others say. The reporter leans forward, her voice dropping slightly. And do you think he's been able to do that? Before Melania can answer, Barron steps in. His voice, though quiet, carries a firmness that demands attention. She doesn't need to answer that, he says, his eyes locked on the reporter. I think her actions speak for themselves. The room feels heavier now, the air thick with unspoken tension. Barron's words hang in the air, and for a brief moment, the reporter falters. But she recovers quickly, her professional mask slipping back into place. You're very protective of your mother, she observes, her tone almost conversational. That's admirable. But do you think it's your responsibility at such a young age? Barron's jaw tightens, but his voice remains steady. I think respect and responsibility aren't limited by age, he says. The reporter's eyebrows raise, and she leans back slightly, as if reassessing her approach. That's an interesting perspective. But don't you ever feel like you're missing out on a normal childhood? At this, Barron pauses. His gaze shifts just briefly to the back of the room, where a young boy no older than 10 is watching intently. The boy's wide eyes are filled with a mixture of curiosity and awe, clutching a notepad in his small hands. Barron returns his attention to the reporter. Normal is relative, he says, his tone calm, but carrying an undercurrent of challenge. Everyone has their own version of it. The reporter opens her mouth to respond, but before she can, the young boy at the back hesitantly raises his hand. The motion catches everyone off guard, and a ripple of surprise moves through the room. Barron notices the boy and offers him a small nod. Go ahead, he says. The boy stands, his voice trembling slightly. Do you ever get scared? He asks, his question directed at Barron but resonating with everyone in the room. The question lingers in the air, and for the first time, Barron's composed exterior softens. He takes a moment before responding, his voice quieter but no less steady. Sometimes, he admits, but I think being scared is part of life. It's what you do with that fear that defines you. The boy nods, his expression thoughtful. The simplicity of the exchange cuts through the tension, and for a brief moment, the atmosphere shifts. But the reporter isn't ready to let go. Sensing an opportunity, she leans forward again. That's a very mature answer, Barron. But isn't it exhausting to always have to be strong? Barron's eyes narrow slightly, and his voice gains a sharper edge. Everyone has their struggles, he says. Being strong doesn't mean you're never tired, it means you keep going anyway. The room falls silent again, the weight of his words settling over everyone present. Melania's gaze doesn't leave her son, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. Donald Trump, meanwhile, watches with an unreadable expression, his hands resting on the podium. The young boy at the back raises his hand again, this time with more confidence. How do you keep going? He asks, his voice steady now. Barron turns to him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. By remembering what's important, he says simply, and by not letting people who don't understand define you. The reporter, now visibly more determined, decides to push one last time. "And what about the people who say your family doesn't deserve the respect you're asking for?" she asks, her tone carefully neutral, but laced with challenge. Barron takes a step closer to the podium, his posture straight and unyielding. "I'd say those people don't know us," he replies, his voice calm but firm. "They only see what they want to see. But that doesn't change who we are." The reporter leans back, her expression faltering for the first time. The room, once filled with murmurs and whispers, is now completely silent, every eye fixed on the young man standing at the podium. Barron's gaze sweeps across the room, landing briefly on the young boy, who looks back at him with a mixture of admiration and hope. For a moment, the weight of the world seems to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. The tension in the room reaches its peak, poised on the edge of something transformative. All that's left is the final resolution, the moment that will define not just Barron, but everyone watching. The room seems to hold its breath, the silence sharp and unyielding. All eyes are fixed on Barron as the reporter leans forward slightly, her confidence flickering but not yet extinguished. Her next question, however, crosses a line, one she may not even fully realize. "You've talked about strength and respect," she says, her tone calculated. "But isn't it true that your family's position makes it easy to talk about these things? Do you really understand what it means to earn respect?" The words hang in the air like a blade, their edge unmistakable. A ripple of discomfort moves through the crowd. For a moment, it feels as though the entire world is watching, waiting to see how the youngest Trump will respond. Barron doesn't hesitate. He steps forward, his movements measured, his expression calm but resolute. His voice, when he speaks, carries a clarity and conviction that silences even the faintest murmur in the room. "Respect isn't about who you are or where you come from," he says, his gaze unwavering as it locks onto the reporter. "It's about how you treat others, even when they don't treat you the same way. It's about standing up for what you believe in, no matter how many people try to tear you down." The reporter blinks, visibly taken aback. The sharp edge of her question dulls under the weight of Barron's response. She opens her mouth as if to interject, but Barron isn't finished. "You asked if I understand what it means to earn respect," he continues, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I do, and I've learned that you don't earn it by tearing other people down or questioning their worth. You earn it by showing up every day, even when it's hard. You earn it by staying true to yourself." The room is utterly silent, the tension now transformed into something electric. The power dynamic has shifted entirely. The reporter, once poised and confident, now sits back in her chair, her expression unreadable but undeniably shaken. For a brief moment, no one moves. It's as though time itself has paused, allowing the weight of Barron's words to settle over everyone in the room. Then, slowly, a ripple of motion spreads through the crowd. Heads nod subtly, a few murmured words pass between journalists, and cameras continue to flash, this time with a different energy. The young boy at the back, the one who had asked earlier if Barron ever gets scared, looks up at him with wide, admiring eyes. His small hands clutch the notepad he brought with him, as though he's found something worth writing down. The reporter finally gathers herself, but her tone has changed. It's softer now, less combative. "Thank you for sharing that," she says, her voice lacking the sharpness it carried before. Barron doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he steps back, his gaze shifting briefly to his mother. Melania, who has been watching the exchange intently, offers him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It's a quiet gesture, but it speaks volumes. A signal of pride, support, and love. The moment that follows is quiet, but profound. Barron stands tall, his presence filling the room in a way that belies his years. He glances at his mother again, and this time, she moves toward him. Melania places a hand on Barron's shoulder, the gesture so simple yet deeply meaningful. Her expression is soft, a mixture of pride and relief, and in that moment, it's clear to everyone that her son has more than met the challenge placed before him. Donald Trump steps forward, his hand resting briefly on Barron's other shoulder. His expression, often guarded in public, reveals a flicker of emotion, something between pride and acknowledgement. The young boy in the back stands up once more, his voice breaking the silence. "Thank you," he says, his words directed at Barron but carrying an unexpected weight. Barron turns to him, his expression softening. "For what?" "For showing us what strength looks like," the boy replies, his voice clear and unwavering. The words hang in the air, and for a moment, it feels as though the entire room breathes as one. The cameras continue to flash, capturing not just the scene, but the emotional resonance that fills the space. As the press conference draws to a close, Barron and his family move toward the exit. The young boy catches Barron's eye one last time, and the teenager offers him a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared moment. The room is quieter now, the energy completely transformed. The reporter, visibly disarmed by Barron's calm yet decisive words, lowers her notepad. For a moment she glances around, searching for a lifeline in the sea of cameras and fellow journalists. But there is none. The weight of the moment belongs entirely to Barron. She clears her throat and says, "I appreciate your candor. Thank you." Her voice lacks its earlier edge, and it's clear she knows the balance of power has shifted irrevocably. No further questions follow. The room seems to collectively decide that there's nothing left to challenge. The press, once a swarm of voices and flashing cameras, is now subdued. They pack their equipment with quieter movements, murmuring among themselves. The tension has broken, replaced by an unspoken agreement that something significant just occurred, something far beyond the usual exchange of questions and answers. As the family exits the room, Barron's expression shifts subtly. The strength and composure he displayed moments ago remain, but there's something deeper in his eyes, a quiet understanding of what just happened. For years he had been the youngest member of a family constantly in the public eye, often shielded from the chaos by his mother's protective instincts. But today, he had stepped into the storm willingly, not as a shielded child, but as someone willing to face the questions and the doubts head-on. Melania, walking beside him, glances at her son. Her face softens as she sees the mix of resolve and quiet reflection in him. Without saying a word, she places a hand on his back, a gesture of reassurance and pride. Barron doesn't look at her, but the small, almost imperceptible smile on his face is enough to let her know he feels it too. Outside, the world is just as chaotic as it was before. But something has shifted. Barron steps into the car waiting for them, his posture as straight and steady as it was on the podium. Melania sits beside him, her hand still resting on his shoulder, a silent testament to her pride. As the car pulls away, the scene inside the room lingers in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. The youngest Trump, often overshadowed and underestimated, had not only held his own, but had redefined what it meant to stand tall under scrutiny. And for those who doubted him, there was no longer any question. Respect wasn't given. It was earned. In the car, as they drive away, Barron stares out the window. The city rushes by, but his mind is elsewhere. His voice, soft but resolute, breaks the silence. It's not just about defending us. It's about showing them who we are. Melania smiles. And who you're becoming. Barron's words and actions leave a lasting impression, not just in the room but beyond. Respect is not granted by title or privilege. It's earned through character, courage, and quiet strength. Sometimes the loudest voice is the one that doesn't shout.